What's up, Amelia from Revenge Rewired here. Today's story, absolutely wild. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. The conference room at Whitmore & Associates smelled like old leather and furniture polish. My Uncle Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table, positioned like he already owned everything. My cousin Maya sat to my right, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from us sat my brother James and our cousin David. The four of us, Grandma, Rose's grandchildren, waited for what we'd thought would be a straightforward estate settlement. Grandma had passed 3 weeks earlier, at age 87, peacefully in her sleep in the Brooklyn brownstone she'd owned for 40 years. The 4-story building in Park Slope was worth at least $800,000, probably more given the neighborhood's recent appreciation. Her investment portfolio, carefully managed over decades of frugal living and smart decisions, held another $150,000. She'd lived modestly, worked as a public school teacher for 35 years, and saved every penny she could. We'd expected her estate to be divided among us grandchildren. Grandma had told each of us, at various times, that she wanted us to have equal shares. "You're all special to me," she'd said countless times. "I want you each to have something to help you build your futures." Uncle Richard, Grandma's younger brother, now 63, had lived in the brownstone's garden apartment for the past 8 years. He'd moved in after his divorce, claiming he needed a fresh start. Grandma had charged him minimal rent, maybe $600 a month, for a space that could have commanded $2,500 on the open market. She'd been generous to him, as she was generous to everyone she loved. "Thank you all for coming," Richard said, pulling a leather folder from his briefcase. His suit was expensive Hugo Boss, I'd guessed, and his watch was a Rolex I'd never seen him wear before. "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to address Rose's estate." "Isn't the estate attorney supposed to be here?" Maya asked. She was a paralegal at a firm in Manhattan and knew the procedures. Grandma used Franklin Rothstein for years. "There's been a change," Richard said smoothly. "Rose updated her will 6 months ago. She used a different attorney, someone I recommended. Everything is perfectly legal and properly executed." My stomach tightened. Grandma hadn't mentioned changing attorneys. She'd loved Franklin Rothstein, trusted him implicitly. They'd worked together since she'd bought the brownstone in 1984. Richard slid copies of a will across the table to each of us. "Rose made some important decisions about her estate. She wanted someone she could trust to manage her legacy properly." I opened the document. The words swam before my eyes as I processed what I was reading. The will named Richard as the sole beneficiary of Grandma's entire estate, the brownstone, the investment accounts, her personal property, everything. We grandchildren were mentioned only in a clause specifically excluding us from any inheritance. "This can't be right," James said, his voice tight. "Grandma would never." "Grandma trusted me with her care," Richard interrupted, his tone sharp. "I was there every day. I managed her medications, drove her to appointments, handled her finances when she couldn't. Not you ungrateful grandchildren who visited maybe twice a year and couldn't be bothered to help with her actual needs." "That's not fair," David protested. "I live in Boston. I called her every week. I visited when I could." "Phone calls don't change adult diapers," Richard said coldly. "Phone calls don't sit with her during dialysis. Phone calls don't reorganize an entire life to provide care. I sacrificed my career, my time, my energy." Rose recognized that sacrifice and rewarded the person who actually loved her enough to be present. Maya's face had gone white. "Uncle Richard, Grandma told me just 2 months ago that she wanted to split everything equally among the 4 of us. She was very specific about it." "People change their minds," Richard said with a shrug. Rose saw clearly who deserved her estate. This will was properly executed, witnessed by 2 independent parties, and notarized. Everything is completely legal. I read through the document more carefully. It was dated March 15, 2020, 6 months before Grandma died. The signature looked like Grandma's shaky handwriting, though something about it seemed off. The witnesses were listed as Margaret Kellerman and Thomas Price, names I didn't recognize. The notary was someone named Lisa Fernandez. "I want to see the original," I said quietly. "This is a certified copy," Richard replied. "The original has been filed with Surrogate's Court. You're welcome to contest it if you want, but I assure you it's ironclad." Rose knew what she wanted, and she made sure it would stand up to any challenge from resentful grandchildren. The meeting dissolved into arguments. Maya demanded to know why Grandma would suddenly change her will so dramatically. James accused Richard of manipulation. David asked pointed questions about the witnesses and the execution. Richard remained calm throughout, his confidence absolute. Contest it if you want, he repeated. Spend your money on lawyers. It won't change anything. Rose made her choice, and the law will uphold it. We left the conference room in stunned silence. On the street outside, the four of us stood in a circle, trying to process what had just happened. He forged it, Maya said flatly. He had to have forged it. Grandma would never exclude us like that. But the will looks legitimate, David said. Witnesses, notary, everything proper. I'm calling Franklin Rothstein, I said, pulling out my phone. If Grandma really changed attorneys and updated her will, Franklin would know about it. I dialed the number I'd found online for Rothstein and Associates. The receptionist put me through after I explained the situation. Franklin Rothstein's voice was warm and professional. I'm so sorry for your loss. Rose was a wonderful woman and a valued client. Mr. Rothstein, my uncle just showed us a will dated March 15th that names him as sole beneficiary. Did you know Grandma changed her will? There was a long pause. Miss Chen, Rose didn't change her will, at least not with another attorney. She came to see me in June, just 3 months before she passed. She updated her will in my office, very specifically because she was concerned about Richard's behavior. Miss Chen, my heart hammered. June. What date in June? June 18th. I have the file right here. She was very clear about her intentions. She wanted to split her estate equally among her 4 grandchildren, with a small bequest to Richard. She was worried he was pressuring her about the estate and wanted to make sure her actual wishes were documented properly. Can I come see you today? Absolutely. Come to my office at 3 p.m. Bring your cousins if possible. We need to discuss this immediately. Franklin Rothstein's office was in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, filled with law books and family photos. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes and the air of someone who'd seen every possible estate dispute over his long career. Maya, James, David, and I crowded into his office. He had a file open on his desk, thick with documents. Before we begin, I need to verify your identities, Franklin said. We showed identification, and he checked us against a list. Good, you're all named in Rose's will, her actual will. He turned the file toward us. The document on top was labeled, Last Will and Testament of Rose Marie Chen, and dated June 18, 2024. Rose came to see me in mid-June, Franklin began. She was upset. She told me Richard had been talking about his inheritance and his brownstone for months, acting as if the estate was already his. She wanted to make absolutely clear that while she appreciated Richard's help, the bulk of her estate was intended for her grandchildren. He showed us the will. It divided the estate into 5 shares, 22.5% to each of us grandchildren, and 10% to Richard as a thank you for his care. The brownstone was to be sold and proceeds divided, or, if we preferred, we could buy out Richard's share and jointly own it. This is what Grandma wanted, Maya said softly. This sounds exactly like her. She was very specific, Franklin confirmed. She also did something unusual. She asked me to document the signing extensively because she was worried about potential challenges. He pulled out a thick envelope and removed several items. First, a video file on a USB drive. She insisted I record the will signing. She wanted proof of her mental capacity and clear intentions. Second, dated photographs of her signing each page of the will, with Franklin and his paralegals as witnesses. The digital photos had embedded time. Third, Franklin's office diary showing the June 18th appointment, with Grandma's signature, in the guest log. Fourth, copies of the identification she'd provided, photocopied the same day with the date stamp visible. Rose was meticulous, Franklin said. She told me, I want to make sure Richard can't twist my words or claim I wanted something different. She specifically mentioned being concerned about him pressuring her. Why didn't you come forward when Richard filed his will? James asked. I didn't know about it until yesterday when Maya called me, Franklin said. I was out of the country for 2 weeks dealing with a family emergency in Taiwan. When I returned and checked my messages, I immediately reviewed Rose's file. The March will Richard presented is either a forgery or was created without Rose's knowledge, because she came to see me 3 months later specifically to ensure her actual wishes were documented. He leaned forward. Here's what's crucial, the timeline. Richard's will is dated March 15th. Rose's will, executed in my office with extensive documentation, is dated June 18th. Under New York law, A later will supersedes an earlier one, assuming both are valid. But more importantly, if we can prove the March will is fraudulent, Richard could face serious criminal charges. How do we prove it's fraudulent? David asked. We need a multi-pronged approach, Franklin said. He started making a list. First, we examined Grandma's calendar and activities in March. Can we prove she couldn't have signed a will on March 15th? Second, we tracked down the witnesses and notary listed on Richard's will. If they're fake or paid off, that's evidence of fraud. Third, we get a forensic handwriting analysis comparing the signatures. Fourth, we subpoena Richard's financial records to look for suspicious payments around March 15th. I can help with the calendar, I said. Grandma kept detailed records in her planner. I have access to her apartment. Chard doesn't know I still have a key from when I used to check on her. I can investigate the witnesses and notary, Maya added. I have resources through my firm for background checks. Franklin nodded approvingly. Good. I'll prepare the legal challenge to Richard's will and file our petition with Surrogate's Court. We'll present Rose's June will as the valid testamentary document, but beyond the legal challenge, we need to consider whether to involve law enforcement. If Richard forged this will, that's a serious crime. He stood in front of us and lied, James said, anger in his voice. He called us ungrateful. He tried to steal from us using our grandmother's name. Then let's prove it, Franklin said. Let's show exactly what he did and make sure he faces consequences. That evening, I used my key to enter Grandma's brownstone through the garden entrance. Richard lived in the garden apartment, but the main entrance was separate. The brownstone smelled like Grandma's lavender sachets and the old books she'd collected. Everything was exactly as she'd left it: her reading chair by the window, her knitting basket, her collection of tea tins on the kitchen shelf. I felt like I was betraying her privacy, but I needed evidence. In her small office, really, just the converted bedroom, my founder planning system. Grandma had kept the same type of planner for decades, a spiral-bound book with a page for each day. She recorded everything: appointments, phone calls, visitors, even what she'd eaten and how she'd felt. I photographed every page from March 2024. On March 15th, the date of Richard S. supposed will, Grandma S. planner showed a Dr. S. appointment at 9 a.m., lunch with her friend Dorothy at noon, and a note that she'd spent the afternoon watching her favorite PBS shows. There was no mention of meeting with any attorney, no mention of signing any documents. But there was something else. In the margin, Grandma had written, Richard asked again about the will, told him to stop pressuring me. Need to talk to Franklin. I photographed that page 3 times to make sure I had clear images. This was evidence that Richard had been pressuring Grandma about the estate even before his supposed will was created. I checked other pages. Throughout March and April, similar notes appeared. Richard upset, I won't discuss estate. Told Richard that brownstone isn't his. Richard counting money that isn't his yet. In May, a more concerning note caught Richard going through my desk. What was he looking for? And then, in early June, called Franklin, making appointment to update will. Must protect grandchildren from Richard's greed. I photographed everything and left the brownstone feeling sick. Richard hadn't just forged a will, he'd been planning this for months, pressuring an elderly woman about her estate, going through her private papers. Meanwhile, Maya had been working her paralegal connections. She called me that night with her findings. The witnesses on Richard's will are interesting, she said. Margaret Kellerman exists. She's a 72-year-old woman who lives in Queens. Thomas Price is a 45-year-old man from Staten Island. I found them through public records searches. Did you contact them? Not yet, but I found something better. I pulled their addresses and cross-referenced with Richard's phone records. I have a friend who could access them through a lawsuit database. Richard called Margaret Kellerman's number multiple times in February and early March. He also called Thomas Price, so he knew them before the supposed will signing. Exactly, that's suspicious. If they were legitimate witnesses, there'd be no reason for him to have extensive contact with them before March 15th. I am guessing he recruited them somehow, maybe paid them to witness a document without fully explaining what it was. David had been investigating the notary. Lisa Fernandez is a notary public in Brooklyn, he reported. But here's the thing, I called her office, pretending to need notary services. Her assistant said Lisa doesn't do residential work anymore, only does notarizations at her office. So the idea that she came to witness Grandma signing a will at the brownstone does unfit her business practice. We need to interview these people, I said, but carefully. If they're involved in Richard's fraud, we don't want to tip them off before we have legal proceedings in place. Franklin arranged for depositions as Grandma's estate attorney representing the valid will. He had standing to question anyone involved in the allegedly fraudulent document. He scheduled depositions for all 3 witnesses over the course of 1 week. Margaret Kellerman came first. She was a nervous woman who kept glancing at her attorney, a public defender assigned because she couldn't afford her own counsel. Ms. Kellerman, Franklin began gently, did you witness Rose Chen signing a will on March 15, 2024? She hesitated. Yes. That's what the paper says. Tell me about that day. Where did this signing take place? At the house. The brownstone. Rose Chen's brownstone in Park Slope. Yes. What time did you arrive? Another hesitation. I don't remember exactly. Morning, afternoon, evening. Afternoon, I think. How did you know Rose Chen? Long pause. I didn't really know her, I mean. So, a stranger asked you to witness her will? Not exactly. Richard, her brother, he asked me to come witness a document. He said his sister needed witnesses. Franklin leaned forward. How much did Richard pay you, Ms. Kellerman? Her attorney interjected. But she answered anyway. $300. Cash. Did Richard tell you what document you were witnessing? He said it was a will, but he said his sister couldn't sign it herself anymore because of arthritis, and he was signing on her behalf with her permission. The room went silent. Franklin wrote notes. So you didn't actually see Rose Chen sign anything? No. Richard had already signed her name. He said it was legal because she'd given him power of attorney. Did you meet Rose Chen that day? No. Richard said she was resting upstairs and couldn't be disturbed. Thomas Price's deposition was similar. He'd been paid $500 to witness a document, told that Rose had authorized Richard to sign for her, and never actually met Grandma or saw her signature created. Lisa Fernandez, the notary, was visibly angry. I never notarized any will for Rose Chen, she said firmly. I remember Richard Chen. He came to my office in February asking about notary services. He wanted to know the exact requirements for witnessing a will in New York. I explained the process, and he left. I never saw him again, and I certainly never notarized any document for him or his sister. Then, how did your notary seal appear on this will? Franklin asked, showing her Richard's document. She examined it closely. This is a photocopy or scan of my seal. See how the impression is too perfect? A physical seal pressed into paper creates slight irregularities, variations in pressure. This looks like someone scanned one of my legitimate notarizations and digitally applied it to this document. Do you still have the original seal from that time period? I do, and I'm willing to provide it for comparison. I'm also filing a report with the Department of State about unauthorized use of my notary seal. This is identity theft and fraud, with witness testimony establishing that the will signing never happened as claimed. We needed forensic evidence to prove the signature itself was forged. Franklin retained Dr. Michael Patterson, a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience and testimony in over 300 trials. He'd worked on major cases involving questioned documents, from contested wills to forged contracts. Dr. Patterson's office was a laboratory filled with specialized equipment, high-powered microscopes, spectral analysis machines, pressure-sensitive tablets, and comparison software. He took the analysis seriously. I'll need multiple exemplars of Rose Chen's authentic signature, he said. At least 20 samples from different time periods, preferably from the years before her death. We provided everything. Canceled checks from her bank account, signed greeting cards she'd sent us, medical forms from her doctors, the signature from her June will, her signature in Franklin's office guest book. Dr. Patterson spent 3 days conducting his analysis. When he called us back to his office, he had a comprehensive report prepared. The signature on the March 15th will is not authentic, he began without preamble. I can state that with absolute certainty. Let me show you why. He displayed blown-up images of Grandma's signature from various documents on his large monitor. Rose Chen's signature showed specific characteristics consistent across time. First, she had a distinctive tremor natural for someone her age that appeared in her handwriting as slight wavering in vertical strokes. Second, she had Parkinson's disease, which affected her letter formation in specific ways. Third, she used a particular signing motion, a muscle memory pattern that was consistent. He switched to the signature on Richard's will. This signature attempts to replicate the visual appearance of Rose's writing, but it lacks the authentic characteristics. Watch. He overlaid the signatures and showed us frame-by-frame analysis. The tremor in this signature is artificially too regular, too predictable. A natural tremor from age or illness creates random variations. This tremor follows a pattern, suggesting someone deliberately tried to make the signature look shaky. He zoomed in further. More tellingly, the pressure dynamics are wrong. Rose S. Parkinson S. caused her to press harder at certain points in her writing as her hand trembled. This created a distinctive pressure pattern. The forged signature shows consistent pressure throughout, more like someone carefully drawing the letters than naturally writing them. He showed us more evidence. The pen lifts were in wrong places, the stroke direction was inconsistent with Rose's motor patterns, and the letter formations showed hesitation marks where the forger had paused to check their work. Most significantly, Dr. Patterson said, pulling up another image, I examined the document under different light spectrums. The ink on Rose S. signature is different from the ink used for the printed text of the will. The will body was printed with a standard laser printer, probably a Canon or similar model, but the signature was added, with a different pen entirely, after the document was printed. How can you tell? Maya asked. Ink analysis. I used reflected infrared spectroscopy to examine the chemical composition. The signature ink contains compounds not found in typical ballpoint pens from 2024. It's actually from a pen model that was discontinued in 2022. Someone used an old pen, probably one they defound in Rose S. A. Apartment 2, forge her signature. He continued through his findings. He'd documented 33 distinct inconsistencies between the forged signature and Rose's authentic signatures. He'd proven the ink was applied after the document was printed. He'd demonstrated that the tremor was artificial. He'd shown that the pressure patterns were incompatible with Parkinson's disease. In summary, Dr. Patterson concluded, this signature is definitely forged. It was created by someone who had access to examples of Rose Chen's handwriting and attempted to replicate it, but who lacked the neuromuscular patterns and motor memory that create authentic signatures. This is not a borderline case. This is clear, unambiguous forgery. The surrogate's court hearing was scheduled for December 10th. 4 months after Grandma's death, Richard arrived with a new attorney, his third, as the first two had withdrawn after reviewing the evidence against him. His new lawyer, Stephen Morrison, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Angela Blackwell presided, a nonsense jurist with a reputation for harsh penalties in fraud cases. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal, with the state seal of New York hanging above the judge's bench. Franklin presented our case methodically. He started with the timeline. Your Honor, the respondent Richard Chen presents a will allegedly executed on March 15, 2024. However, Rose Chen executed her actual final will in my office on June 18, 2024, 3 months after Richard's supposed will. I have extensive documentation of the June signing, including video recording, photographs, office records, and witness testimony from my staff. He played the video of Grandma signing the June will. The courtroom was silent as we watched her carefully read each page, initial the margins, and sign the final page with her shaky but determined handwriting. She looked directly at the camera and said, "This is my will. I'm doing this to make sure my grandchildren are taken care of. No one is pressuring me. This is what I want." The timestamp was visible, June 18, 2024, to 4:47 p.m. Franklin then presented Grandma's planner entries, showing no attorney meeting on March 15, and specifically showing her concerns about Richard's pressure regarding the estate. Next came the witness depositions. Margaret Kellerman's testimony that she'd been paid to witness a document without ever seeing Grandma. Thomas Price's admission that he'd witnessed Richard's signature, not Rose's. Lisa Fernandez's testimony that her notary seal had been misappropriated and digitally applied to the document. Your Honor, Franklin said, not a single person who allegedly witnessed this will actually saw Rose Chen sign it. The entire execution is fabricated. Finally, Dr. Patterson took the stand. For 90 minutes, he walked through his forensic analysis. He showed the artificial tremor, the wrong pressure patterns, the inconsistent pen lifts, the ink discrepancies. He displayed comparison after comparison, each one showing clear differences between authentic and forged signatures. In my professional opinion, based on 30 years of forensic document examination, Dr. Patterson concluded, the signature on the March 15th will is definitely not authentic. It is a forgery created by someone who had access to examples of Rose Chen's handwriting but could not replicate the neuromuscular patterns of her actual signing process. Morrison's cross-examination was weak. Couldn't handwriting very naturally? Natural variation exists within a consistent framework, Dr. Patterson replied. What we see here isn't variation, it's fundamental incompatibility with the motor patterns Rose Chen used for signing. The tremor is artificial, the pressure is wrong, and the ink analysis proves the signature was added after the document was created. Morrison had no effective counter. His expert witness, a handwriting analyst he'd hired, had withdrawn from the case after reviewing Dr. Patterson's findings, unwilling to stake his professional reputation on defending an obvious forgery. Judge Blackwell called a brief recess. When court resumed, she looked at Richard with open contempt. "Mr. Chen, would you like to testify in your defense?" Richard glanced at Morrison, who shook his head slightly. "I decline to testify, Your Honor." "Very well." Judge Blackwell reviewed her notes. "This court has heard overwhelming evidence that the March 15th will purporting to be Rose Chen's last will and testament is fraudulent. The signature is forged. The witnesses were paid to authenticate a document they never properly witnessed, and the notary seal was misappropriated without authorization." She looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Chen, you have attempted to defraud your own nieces and nephews of their inheritance. You forged your sister's signature. You recruited false witnesses. You misused a notary seal. You filed fraudulent documents with this court. Your conduct is not just unethical, it's criminal." Richard's face had gone white. His hands gripped the table. "The March 15th will is declared invalid and is stricken from the record. The June 18th will, properly executed in Attorney Rothstein's office with extensive documentation, is hereby admitted to probate as Rose Chen's valid last will and testament. The estate will be distributed according to that document." She wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Chen, you should retain criminal defense counsel immediately. The evidence of forgery, fraud, and filing false instruments is overwhelming." She turned to Franklin. "Attorney Rothstein, please prepare an accounting of all legal fees and costs associated with this matter. Mr. Chen will be ordered to reimburse the estate in full for the expenses his fraud has caused." Morrison stood. "Your Honor, your client is fortunate I don't hold him in contempt and order immediate detention," Judge Blackwell snapped. "He attempted to steal nearly $1 million from his family using forged documents. Only the fact that this is civil court prevents me from taking more immediate action. The criminal courts will deal with him appropriately." The district attorney's office moved quickly. Richard was indicted 6 weeks later on multiple felony charges: second-degree forgery, first-degree scheming to defraud, offering a false instrument for filing, criminal impersonation, and identity theft for misusing the notary seal. The prosecution was handled by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Wu, who specialized in elder fraud and financial crimes. She assembled an ironclad case using all the evidence we'd gathered for the civil trial, plus additional evidence her investigators uncovered. They found that Richard had practiced forging Grandma's signature dozens of times, sheets of practice signatures hidden in his apartment. They found searches on his computer for how to forge a will and New York will requirements dated to February 2024. They found $800 withdrawn from his bank account in early March, corresponding to the payments made to Margaret Kellerman and Thomas Price. Richard's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Ada Wu was uninterested in leniency. "Your client targeted a vulnerable elderly woman, his own sister, and attempted to steal her life savings from her grandchildren. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, premeditated fraud that he planned for months." The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. At sentencing, Judge Harold Martinez listened to victim impact statements from all 4 of us grandchildren. Maya spoke about how Grandma had worked multiple jobs to help pay for her college education. James talked about the money Grandma had lent him to start his business, insisting he pay it back even though she'd planned to forgive the debt in her will. David described how Grandma had encouraged his music career when everyone else told him to get a real job. "I talked about the countless hours Grandma had spent teaching me to cook her recipes, telling me stories about our family history, showing me what real love and generosity looked like." Richard Chen tried to erase all of that, I concluded. "He tried to steal not just money, but our grandmother's final act of love for us. He forged her name, corrupted her wishes, and lied about who she was and what she wanted. He deserves every consequence the law allows. Judge Martinez sentenced Richard to 4 years in state prison followed by 3 years of probation. He was also ordered to pay $127,000 in restitution, covering all legal fees, expert fees, and court costs from both the civil and criminal proceedings. Upon release, he would be permanently barred from serving as executor, trustee, or fiduciary for any estate. "You betrayed your sister's memory and your family's trust," Judge Martinez said. "You attempted to profit from forgery and fraud. Society has zero tolerance for such behavior, especially when it targets elderly family members. You will serve your full sentence." Richard was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look at any of us. The brownstone was sold 6 months later for $875,000. After Richard's 10% share was deducted, which went directly to the restitution fund. The remaining proceeds were split among us for grandchildren. Combined with the investment accounts, each of us received approximately $235,000. More valuable than the money was what we'd protected: Grandma's true wishes and her memory. 3 years later, I stood in the living room of the condo I'd bought with my inheritance. The walls were painted the same warm yellow Grandma had used in her brownstone kitchen. On my bookshelf sat her collection of cookbooks, the pages stained and annotated with her handwriting, not forged. Maya had used her inheritance as a down payment on a house in Westchester. James had expanded his business, hiring 3 new employees. David had recorded his first album, dedicating it to Rose Chen, who believed in me when no one else did. We gathered for Sunday dinner once a month, rotating between our homes, cooking Grandma's recipes and sharing stories. We talked about her often, keeping her memory alive in the way she would have wanted. Richard was released after serving 3 years. I heard through family connections that he'd moved to New Jersey, working construction, and living in a small apartment. We had no contact. As far as I was concerned, he'd ceased to be family the moment he forged Grandma's signature. Sometimes I thought about that meeting in the conference room when Richard had presented his forged will with such absolute confidence he'd thought he'd won. He'd called us ungrateful, claimed Grandma had trusted him above us, smiled as he announced he'd stolen everything. But I'd already met with Franklin Rothstein. I'd already seen the real will, watched the video of Grandma signing it, heard her clear voice stating her actual wishes. I'd known, sitting silently while Richard gloated, that his fraud would be exposed and his theft would fail. The timeline proved everything. Richard's will was dated March 15th. Grandma's real will was dated June 18th. Franklin's file stamps, his office records, the video timestamp, irrefutable proof that Grandma had signed her actual will 3 months after Richard created his forgery. Richard had been too arrogant to imagine we'd fight back, too confident in his forgery, too certain that we'd simply accept his lies. He'd underestimated our love for Grandma and our determination to honor her actual wishes. The handwriting expert had taken less than a day to prove the forgery. The witness depositions had taken a week. The court hearing had taken a single session. Justice, when backed by irrefutable evidence and executed through proper legal channels, had been swift and absolute. Grandma's estate had been distributed exactly as she intended. The person who tried to corrupt her legacy had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his family, and any claim to the inheritance he'd tried to steal. Every month when my cousins and I gathered for dinner, we raised a glass to Rose Chen, a woman who'd worked hard her entire life, saved carefully, loved generously, and made sure her wishes were documented so thoroughly that no amount of fraud could override them. Richard had tried to forge her signature, but he could never forge her values, her integrity, or her love for her grandchildren. That was the real inheritance she left us, worth far more than any brownstone or investment account. And no one could take that away.